Good afternoon and welcome to this evidence session for the Committee on Standards in Public Life. The committee advises the Prime Minister and the government of the day on processes and procedures for upholding high ethical standards in British public life. We're not a regulator and we don't look at individual cases, but we do look at the overall system which safeguards standards for this country. I'm very pleased for this session that we have been joined by Dr. Melissa McCullough, who is the Standards Commissioner for the Northern Ireland Assembly, and also by Douglas Bain, who is the acting and about to be appointed Commissioner for Standards for the Senedd in Cardiff. Thank you very much indeed for being with us this afternoon. From the committee's side, we have three of our independent members, Dame Shirley Pearce, Onisha Shah and Dr. Jane Martin. The committee, on the 25th anniversary of the initial report of this committee by Lord Nolan, which established the 7 principles of public life, undertook some academic research to map the tapestry of standards bodies that have grown up in the UK over the last few decades. And this inquiry aims to review whether that system of overlapping jurisdictions works effectively. We are aiming also to make recommendations where there seem to be areas that are not as effective as they might be, and also to identify areas of best practice. We're live stream on YouTube, as viewers will be aware, but I would like to point out that we are not going to be looking at specific cases because that's not within the reach of this committee. And we are specifically avoiding anything which is subject to existing or ongoing litigation. So I think with those provisos and that introduction, we can go straight to questions. Thank you very much indeed for being with us this afternoon. I'm going to start asking really quite a broad question, which is how does standards regulation operate in the Senedd and in the Northern Ireland Assembly? And what are the powers and remits of your specific roles? And I might perhaps start with Dr. McCullough for this one. You're on mute, I'm sorry.
Sorry about that. Thanks for the invite, Lord Evans and the committee. I suppose when you think about the Northern Ireland, the powers and the remit, it's quite clear in the legislation, and the remit is of the commissioner is to investigate complaints or referrals in accordance with the legislation, to initiate the investigation where there's a breach, and then to report to the Assembly on that investigation, and then the committee then takes the recommendation forward and they decide sanctions or whether they agree with the recommendations. Commissioner can also, within their remit, have their own initiative of any investigation or, if requested by the Assembly, give advice on any matter of general principle to do with standards of conduct of members of the Assembly. So that's the remit in a nutshell. The powers are quite vast, actually, compared to some of the other standards commissioners, I believe. And that is that in legislation, I have the power to call and compel witnesses and the production of papers, to take evidence under oath. Non-compliance is a punishable offense. And, you know, I think that's really the main powers.
And that very strong set of powers, is that as a result of the particular political circumstances in Northern Ireland in the run-up to the creation of the Assembly, or what was the thinking behind that, do you know?
I'm not entirely sure. My guess is that it probably is to do with that. And of course, the Commissioner for Standards probably was later than most commissioners in terms of legislation for this role. So I think they had time with an interim for a while where they maybe had time to think and experience what was going on. And I know that Northern Ireland tends to look at other parts of the UK and how they're doing things, and, you know, look at the issues, both good and bad, and maybe even reports from your committee in the past, looking at the different jurisdictions. So it could be that. I mean, I don't have a sense of history on it, but it is quite broad quite broad powers compared to others.
Thank you very much. Mr. Bain.
Yes, I mean, very similar on that last point. I don't think it was actually connected with the political situation in Northern Ireland.
Okay.
The Northern Ireland legislation is based on the Welsh legislation, which preceded it by a number of years, and that was the National Assembly for Wales Commissioner for Standards measure of 2009. The principal aim of the Senate Commissioner for Standards is to promote, encourage and safeguard high standards of conduct in the public office of member of the Senate. And the main function, exactly the same as Northern Ireland, is to investigate and report on complaints. But these are complaints not just of breaching the code of conduct, but of breaching, for example, the Senate's dignity and respect policy, and also a number of provisions of standing orders, mainly relating to declaration and registration of interests, both financial and non-financial. I suppose the only significant difference, and one that causes me some anxiety between Northern Ireland and Wales, is that in Wales there is no power for the Commissioner to initiate an investigation. And I mean, I have certainly seen one instance of what I regarded as outrageous misconduct by a member, but probably because everyone else assumed that someone else was going to make the complaint. I actually got no complaints about it and haven't been able to take any action. And the Standards of Conduct Committee are aware of my concerns about that matter.
Thank you very much. We've noted that both your jurisdictions have a set of principles which are based on the 7 principles of public life, Nolan Principles, but in both Wales and Northern Ireland, there are additional principles to govern conduct. I wonder what your view was on the effectiveness of the 7 Nolan Principles as the sort of guide for public standards, and also the value added by the additional standards that your systems have adopted. Perhaps Mr. Bain, would you like to begin on that question?
Certainly, my Lord. Could I just correct that the information you've been provided with? Northern Ireland does not, Wales does not at present actually have any additional principles. They rely on the Nolan Principles. The Senate is debating this afternoon, in about 2 hours' time, the new Code of Conduct, and that will include, if approved, an additional respect principle. The existing code sets out the Nolan Principles in a way that they're what's expected of members, but previous commissioners have interpreted them, and this has been accepted by the committee and the Senate, as being mandatory. So they've been useful in that regard, because there were a number of misconducts that didn't breach any of the specific rules in the old code, but were dealt with as breaches of the principle. The new code moves the position slightly, in that it says that these principles are what's required of members, and indeed there's a catch-all of new rule which says that breaching any of the principles is a breach of the code, and that's intended for the situation that isn't covered by any of the 20-odd specific rules.
I'll come on to the situation in Northern Ireland in a moment, but that's interesting because there's quite a strong school of thought that says that the principles are too high level to be directly justiciable, as it were, as rules in themselves. But clearly that is the case in Wales, and I assume from the way in which you describe it that it works effectively.
Yes, though I must say I was one of those that pressed for the new code to be much more rules-based. I think the hybrid that's been adopted will be a good one, because one of the difficulties with principle-based code, principle-based, is I don't think it's clear either for members of the public who might want to make a complaint, but equally importantly for the members. And it has led to a very significant number of inadmissible complaints being made by the public who simply don't understand the way that these provisions will be interpreted. I think one of the difficulties in the past has been that the descriptive text in relation to each principle really hasn't fitted principles as they work in the Senate. And the new code, the supporting text has been updated and made much more relevant to the principle.
Thank you. Dr. McCullough.
Yes, thank you. I actually find that the principles as laid out in our code are quite robust in the way they're laid out in the text. And the extra additional principles of equality, respect, good working relationships, and promoting good relations. Of course, they are in the Northern Ireland context, especially, I think, good for that. But there are rules that have come, so this code is new. It was changed in 2016 and updated. So it moved from principles and rules to rules only. And in doing so, it means that the principles themselves aren't enforceable. And so what I would say is that many of the rules, the 21 rules, are directly relatable to those principles. So for equality, et cetera, if you've breached the law, inequality, you've broken a rule, things like that. But the general side of it, the things that are a bit more gray, or they're not really going to be caught out from the code. I find that people tend to complain in terms of the principles, which is always, I think that's a great thing to speak in terms of the principles. But I usually have to go back to most complainants and say, okay, this won't be admissible if you can't find the rule that you want, to say you believe was breached. So in that sense, yes, there's a lot of inadmissible complaints because sometimes they can't find a rule that will lead to it. And so I think if you're only considering, if these principles are really only loosely considered, if there's been a breach in a rule, and because they're implicit in a rule, you could say they're being thought of, but I really don't know that I feel like there's a potential. If we don't have all those principles, the Nolan Principles included, kind of mapped and spoken about, I kind of think we lose the language of the principles. I do think I quite like Douglas's approach of the hybrid. For example, right now we're struggling with, I notice we have an honesty, honesty is not in a rule. So if somebody, for example, has a social media complaint about something being dishonest or not true in a post that they make, it wouldn't get caught by a rule because there is no rule that maps onto the honesty principle. And I just think it needs to be very carefully guided. And I think if there was a hybrid model, I'm anxious to see Douglas's now, because the new code, because we're looking for a stage 2 review at the minute. I do think there's a better way than fully rules-based, because I personally think that it moves away from, it takes so many complaints out of the admissibility arena, which I think just undermines the trust people have in the system, which is never good.
Thank you very much. I'm going to pass on to Jane Martin. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan, and good afternoon again to Melissa and Douglas. So you already started to talk about how your systems work respectively, and I can see that some of the challenges around that are emerging. But could I just give you an opportunity now to focus down, because we do want to learn as much as we can from your experience and your structures and processes. So this is a good opportunity for us. So, in that vein, could you sort of crystallize perhaps for us what are the strengths and weaknesses of the way in which standards are regulated in Wales and Northern Ireland? What are the sort of highlight strengths and weaknesses that you think we could learn something from? And perhaps Douglas, Bain, you would start.
Yes, certainly. The system, from what I've seen as acting commissioner over the last 13 or 14 months, works very well in Wales. But that is in large part due to the fact that everyone accepts that it's non-political. Well, nearly everyone accepts among the members that it's non-political, and we have a very small standards of conduct committee comprising of four members representing the main parties, and they on all my dealings with them, it has been absolutely clear that they leave their political allegiances at the door of the committee room and deal with the complaints on the merits. Now that was in marked contrast to my experience in Northern Ireland. Melissa will know better what it's like now. And so in Wales, there has been no move towards having independent members, nor, provided the present climate remains, do I consider there would be any need to move in that direction. Another great strength is the openness and cooperation I receive from Commission staff. I don't have to go through any formal procedure to get information, a phone call or an email, and I get responses very quickly. The weaknesses in the system is the present system is open to abuse by members by delaying the system. If I tell you that there was a complaint that started off before my appointment, well before my appointment as acting commissioner, when I was appointed in November 2019, it had started, I think, some 18 months before that, and it still has not been reported on. Well, it's been reported on by me over a year ago, but it hasn't seen the light of day yet, and that's by a particular member who manipulates the system in all sorts of ways, which I can't go into in a public session.
Sure.
But there are big steps being taken to try and prevent that happening again. Another weakness in my mind is an area that is out of my remit, but is the level of sanctions imposed. And levels of sanctions imposed by the Senate are, to my mind, substantially out of line with those imposed elsewhere, even in Wales by the Public Service Ombudsman when dealing with the conduct of councillors. There is an increasing trend in Wales, sadly, for some politicians to use the complaints system to try and score party political points. And I'm pleased to say that the new code contains a number of provisions to discourage that action, including the new Rule 23, which makes it a breach of the code for a member to submit frivolous, vexatious, or unfounded complaints, or manifestly unfounded complaints.
Yes.
But as I say, that is from a tiny minority of members. It's something that we'll have to look at carefully after the election. I mean, it is likely that there will be members return in May on the platform of abolishing the Senate. And they may see political advantage in trying to exploit the complaint system. But that's something to watch.
Sure. Thank you. Dr. McCullough, what would you like to add in your experience?
Yeah, in my experience, I should add, I'm 6 months in post, so, pretty cold eye. But I would say that the powers in the legislation, which I've already mentioned, are a strength. The independence of the office, you're not a member of the Assembly and you're not, in any way associated with them in terms of as an employee or anything like that. And so the independence is very clear by the legislation of it. And the appointment of the commissioner and all the rules around that. There's also a new, just on Monday, a new law the royal assent was given to the role of the commissioner is going to include the ministerial code of conduct. So this will be the first in the UK jurisdictions to actually have that. So that will bring a whole nother, that will be 2 different codes of conduct. By the way, one being very wide, which would be the ministerial code of conduct, and then the MLA's code of conduct, the member code of conduct, which is very narrow. and rules-based. So it'll be quite an interesting working round to figure that out. And there's still many issues to be ironed out in regards to it. But I think that is definitely going to be a strength, because prior to this, I don't think most of the public wouldn't realize that the commissioner didn't have the ability to investigate complaints against ministers. In fact, they never saw this artificial sort of division of the two. And so now it does feel much better. So that weakness is, in a sense, has been addressed. And I know Douglas did have a lot to do with that. He was quoted in some of their debates over it. So the weaknesses, I would say, is there are very few avenues for, I mean, in terms of rectification, but not, you know, I do believe that there's some things that an apology would be wonderful for. And it doesn't give a whole lot of scope for that. So you're going through a whole investigation process when actually, if you looked at more of a mediation style viewpoint on things, you will get further. And it also would probably be in the best interest of MLAs as well, of members. So that's one weakness. I do think we need to get a better hybrid. I think the rules-based misses things, which does not help the public, although it is very fair for the MLAs, so they know exactly the rules. But I think there's a better medium. And a few of the principles need better reflected in the rules, even so, even if you did move to a hybrid. So those sort of things are the weaknesses in my view.
Yeah, okay. And perhaps I could just stick with you for my second question, which is, I mean, flows, I hope, which is, what are the biggest obstacles then that you face as a Standards Commission? I mean, I can understand what you said about the weaknesses, but again, just to sort of crystallise what you know so far, and I'm sure your early eyes for the first 6 months has been really important. So what are you seeing as the biggest obstacles?
What I'm seeing is this, with some, not all, in fact, very few, but there is a sense that some people want to see it as political.
Yeah.
And it is, so that's a little bit frustrating and a bit of an obstacle, but I think, it's surmountable. And I think there's a lack of understanding, not just by the public, but the MLAs themselves. And I've come to see that in terms of the way they don't understand the process or bringing witness, there's all little glitches throughout because people don't understand it. And fair enough, they might never have been through it, but it's all there written down. So there's this need to maybe just reinforce it in some other ways. So we're launching things on websites, training courses. We're trying to get a bit more awareness around it. I think there's also, I guess I wouldn't call it an obstacle, but I think this whole Northern Ireland has its own little context, and with Brexit and all these other things, I think it's going to be a huge obstacle. I think it will correlate to my inbox going up and growing as the tensions grow. And it seems people are dividing a bit more because of it, which I'm not, could be very understandable given these circumstances. But, I do think it's going to be an obstacle. I can't see how it won't be. And so I think they're the main ones.
Okay, well, we might pick up on that a bit more. And Douglas, to you as well, about the biggest obstacles, you would say.
Yes, I mean, I think I concur with Melissa. The biggest obstacle is people understanding what the complaints process is supposed to be about. In terms of the public understanding, I suppose the biggest difficulty is getting across to them that the complaints process is about standards of ethical conduct, not the standards of service.
Yes.
Provided to them by a member. Although one of my areas of interest, both in Northern Ireland and here, I believe that an extraordinarily poor standard of service can breach the principle of respect, which is the new principle, and the guidance to the code after some prompting does include words to that effect. But I mean, the bar for that will be very high, because plainly you couldn't say someone was in breach of the code because they don't reply to constituents' letters, because some constituents go on and on, and there comes a time where you have to say, sorry, I'm not replying to anything more from you.
Of course, yeah.
As regards the understanding of the members, because the Senate is much smaller, only 60 members, and most of them in tight party groups, I think the understanding is not bad. but I'm pleased to say that I'm going to be involved in the induction process for all new members. And that should deal with that. A big obstacle facing me is the ever increasing number of complaints. And if I tell you that before I took over as Standards Commissioner, they were running at less than 100 a year. In fact, well less than 100. And already this year, from April, we're well in excess of 200.
Oh.
Now, most of these are inadmissible, but even an inadmissible complaint is disturbing for the member. And it also wastes a great deal of resource because they still have to be processed. Not much of my time, but and I only have, unlike House of Commons, where they seem to have a huge number of staff. The complaint system in Wales is the Commissioner and 1.5 members of staff.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very conscious of time, but I mean, what do you put down this increase to? I mean, what's your? I mean, is it just that word got around? I mean, you know, what's caused that? Do you think?
Well, at least 50% of the increase is due to one particular member.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Either making complaints or having complaints made about him.
Okay.
Because,
okay.
Complaints are publicity, and there's no bad publicity, it appears to his view.
I see. Okay. We'll leave that one there, I'm sure. Okay. Thank you very much. That's all from me. I'd like to move. I think Dame Shirley has some questions to follow up. Thank you. Thanks,
Jane. Yes, thanks to you both. Really, really interesting. I'm keen to get a bit more information on your perception of the tension between political imperatives and standards. The interaction here. Is it inevitable that there's a political influence on standards and a tension between standards and getting the politics done? And how is it manifesting itself? And what do you see? You touched, Dr. McCullough, on the difficult situation in Northern Ireland at the moment, and you're saying that you think it's going to get worse. Could you say a little bit more about how you see that, and what challenges it's going to bring to you?
I think, you know, again, I should say, you know, 6 months in, and this is sort of an academic view of what I'm saying, I feel like, you know, there's a little bit of a wave coming soon, and that is where, you know, these good working relationships and things that, you know, with the Assembly only being back up and running just before COVID hit, you know, we're sort of now being hit by other things. There seems to me to be a lack of respect in terms of behaviors towards each other lately, in committees, in plenary. I mean, it just seems to be getting a little bit more heated, if you like. That's what I'm seeing. And so when I see that, I kind of start to believe that, you know, there could be very well people making complaints for political reasons. I have not seen that yet, in my view. But, you know, I can see where it could drive that type of behavior. But equally, the behavior that I'm seeing could be very validly complained about in certain circumstances. So, you know, I feel that, you know, when politics is strained, like it certainly seems to be at the moment, or going that direction, I think it tends to drive standards not up, put it that way. And I do think that there probably, you know, could be people thinking the reason for it is valid because, you know, this is a political, you know, it just feels to me a little bit different now than it did 6 months ago. I mean, I think, you know, that feel good COVID, let's all help each other type of feeling that I felt, and most people were feeling, I think we're now entrenched a little bit in our in our political views. And so I will probably see a more, you know, I have to be very clear when I'm doing investigations that this is nothing to do with politics, it has to do with behavior. But over and over again, the person wants to bring the politics into it continually. So it's a battle in that sense to say, hold on, this is not, and they don't believe that you can divorce the two. And some people who are complaining don't believe that. But I believe, yes, there's context, but normally it's able to be removed from that context and say, is this the right way to behave or not in terms of the code? You know, so I think in that respect, there's a part of me that knows that politics will always play a bit of a role in people's wanting to explain the situation. But, you know, Northern Ireland also has a very different view. You know, I try to just not even take consideration in terms of the, you know, you could, for example, you can show, you have to be cognizant of everyone's views. But in my view, if behavior is behavior, it doesn't matter whether you're a Republican, a unionist, a loyal, you know, but behavior is behavior. And so I just, you know, to stay above all that, it's very, very important in this role, especially in Northern Ireland.
Is that, do you think you've got the right powers and structures and to be able to stay above that, or do you need more support from political leaders perhaps, and is that around?
Well, it's interesting because my first thing was to try to meet with the political leaders, and I met with a few, and currently drafting, you know, sort of a letter to say, you know, it's now 6 months in, and I haven't met with them all because of COVID, but the ones I have met with have been so supportive. And I've explained to them, you know, we may need to change some things in the code because I've noticed it right away that we were missing certain things, and they were so supportive. And, you know, I have to say, I've been very impressed by the politicians on the whole, and the leaders and the speaker, and people very, very much, I think there's a will to want to be always have high standards, but then, you know, circumstances take over and then you find, so I really haven't had, you know, come to me in another couple of years and I might be saying something different.
Yes, okay, thank you very much. Mr. Bain, Wales and the tensions between politics and delivering standards.
Yes, I'm pleased to say that I haven't experienced any difficulties with that at all at the moment. And I think that's in part due to the lead given by the Standards of Conduct Committee and making clear that it's a non-partisan approach to dealing with conduct issues. And I think the important thing from my point of view to preserve that is to be scrupulously fair both to the person making a complaint and to the member. And provided I can achieve that, not everyone will agree with the decisions I come to plainly, but people know that it's followed a fair process and the decision is taken on the merits, and I have no regard to politics in that at all. It helps, of course, that not coming from Wales, no one can suggest with any basis that I have any interest in the politics of Wales, and Melissa will, to an extent, will have the same benefit.
Yes, I find that does help, Douglas, very much so. You know, I should add that it's totally great to not be from a place, because it means that you don't have you don't know enough people. You know, people know, and even the perception of it, your accent is different, so they know you're not from there, especially here in Northern Ireland. You know, so it is a benefit, isn't it? Yeah. Can I also add, Dame Shirley, that I think the benefit of the rules is, the funny thing is, the benefit of that rules-based structure of a code is very helpful here, I think, to MLAs. It's very fair to them. And I think it is probably allows a bit of trust to be built because they know what the rule is. You know, it's not ambiguous.
I mean, I sort of understand that, and I'm pleased that you're both feeling confident about this. But if you look back into the past, there have been examples of where politics and standards have really hit each other. We don't need to go into cases for detail. We're not allowed to do that. But I suppose I'm keen to get a sense of how you would handle that if it happens again.
If I should start, I think in the same way as I approach the job at the moment, it's a case of, as I said, of having a scrupulously fair system, being open. I mean, for example, I voluntarily published my interests on my website. There's no requirement for me to do that. I know Melissa, there's a requirement of her to publish her interests. But being open and fair, and I just cannot see it being a problem in my tenure in Wales.
Yeah, I think also disclosure, really keeping communications going. I mean, I'm very much communicative in terms of with the complainant and the one complained about, because I really believe, as Douglas has alluded to, that their interests, both sides, are equally important to me. And so, you know, understanding that it's going to be a fair process and that everybody's going to be treated fairly, and that nobody's not going to be unsure of what's going on. I think that's really, really important, because people can run away with their imaginations if you let people don't know what's going on, or they think something's happening that's not. And so I think key to that, as in most things in life, is communication, you know?
Okay, I'll thank you very much. I'll hand that on to my colleague. I think it's Monisha Shah next.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I had some questions on the relationship between legislatures and governments, if I may. Dr. McCullough, you just spoke about the fact that there are some changes happening where, you know, ministerial codes are being are now being part of your remit, as it were. But I wondered, Ms. Bain, if you could tell us what is the relationship between your codes of conduct for the Assembly and the ministerial codes that governs the executives? Is there an overlap? Are there inconsistencies?
Well, there's inconsistency of the way they're dealt with, but I am excluded from considering complaints about the conduct of a member when he or she is acting exclusively in a ministerial capacity, and that is dealt with under the ministerial code. And that is, well, come back to that. I can, of course, deal with complaints about the conduct of the person who is a minister when they're not acting in a ministerial capacity. And it's important to note that the Code of Conduct for Senate members applies to them at all times and in all circumstances. So matters that have nothing to do with their Senate duties, you know, domestic violence, we've had examples of being convicted for drunk driving while on holiday. These are all covered by the code, and if a minister behaved in that way, it would be dealt with by me. Rather curiously, Section 8 of the measure in effect prohibits me from making any comment about whether I think the ministerial code is effective or not. And so all I can really say about it is that it's similar to the House of Commons process. There's an independent advisor, and if a complaint is made to the First Minister, as I understand it, he is required to refer it to the advisor unless he considers it can be dealt with in another way or is plainly without merit.
Thank you very much. I suppose the question for both of you is, what makes for an effective code of conduct in your view? I mean, is it more important for codes to cover all prohibited behavior, if you like, in close detail, or should codes be simpler and shorter and allow for a degree of personal interpretation? What is your view?
Well, if I start, I think the view is that what you need is a hybrid. There are great advantages in a rules-based system for clarity for the public and for members. But inevitably, there will be types of conduct that you couldn't conceive would happen. For example, this is in the public domain, a member recording private conversations between my predecessor and his staff, covertly recording them. No one would ever have imagined that would happen or draft a rule that would have covered it. Now, because we were dealing with the principles, it was covered. So I think you need a mix between the two. But you also need an effective process for dealing with the complaints. And there's no point having you can have a wonderful code, but unless the process for dealing with it works, then you've been rather lost the point of the exercise. And I think part of that is that the public need to get a result from a complaint within a reasonable time. Otherwise, you get all sorts of rumours that there's a cover-up or it's whitewash or whatever. And delay that can on occasion occur is a concern.
I actually don't disagree with Douglas on that. I think that whether they're short or concise, or as long as they are deemed fair, whichever way that is, I do think a rules-based only cannot be fair to the complainant alone, and maybe not even to the complained about, the MLA, the member, because I think, you know, in terms of behavior, they're not always as clear as the rules. You know, there's ambiguity and gray areas, and I think a rules-based structure solely takes away the need to make a judgment. And sometimes behavior is just about that, the judgment of someone, you know, that is what it is. And, you know, ethical considerations are messy sometimes. And that's why, you know, commissioners are put in place to make judgments on that after investigating and give recommendations. So, you know, I don't think codes should be written in fear of that. I think they should celebrate that a bit, because that's what the principles are driving, and those are the culture changes that will be driven through those. So some hybrid system is better than exact rules, and you know, but too much, I don't think too much ambiguity is very good for anybody, really, including the commissioner, you know, because I think it can make people not trust us, and you know, it's because there is too much judgment in something. So that happy medium, that sweet spot has to be hit. I'm searching for it. I'm glad I'm actually, I have to be honest, and I'm very glad I'm to the rule side, swinging that way, wanting to get to the middle rather than the other way, because it would be a hard ask to be making big judgments under big principles that are very difficult when you just start a job, because I think it has the ability to undermine your own sort of role if it's not done right. So there were pros to it, but I'm looking forward to being able to address those issues when I can, or if I can.
Thank you. And did you want to say anything further about the relationship between the codes? You said earlier that the ministerial code, I think you said one is very, you know, you were hinting at the differences between the two, but if you wanted to say anything further, I would like to give you the opportunity.
You know, not necessarily, although I do think it's going to be interesting to see how it will operate, because as you know, I just wonder, is there going to be any conflicts of it? Because when you're looking at, you know, you could be looking at two almost identical, I think no cases can be identical, but let's just assume there are. And one code will find it where the other one won't. And so I always find, when I was even looking at these sort of proposals earlier on, you know, 6 months ago, trying to figure out, well, which one would really be, it seems to me that there could be a bit of a conflict in how, but you have to follow the code for the member or the minister. So I cannot deviate from that. It's just that I feel that there could be a case where it will lead to different outcomes for similar complaints, perhaps. We'll wait and see, you know.
Thank you very much. Thank you. That was the end of my questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I wonder whether, just so that my mind is clear on this, particularly in Northern Ireland model, when there is an issue around the ministerial code, what is it that actually triggers your ability to investigate an alleged or potential breach under the ministerial code? Is that a matter? Do you have to have a complaint if you are responding, or do you need to get agreement politically to be able to investigate, or how does that work with the Northern Ireland minister?
So the new newly formed law will be the same procedures as the members code, just the different code. So the procedure will be the same pretty much. After the investigation will be different. The report and who it goes to, I don't even know that they're sure yet on those details. I do believe that the committee of Standards and Privileges is going to play a bigger role than they had originally thought when they were thinking of how that would work out. But we're meeting about this on Friday, actually, because there's so much to be ironed out. But it is actually going to be in line with exactly the way the process runs for MLA Code of Conduct. So I think it's going to be a trust builder in terms of the public's, because it is not going to be.
Can you remind us what that procedure is for the MLA Code of Conduct?
Sure. So when a complaint comes in, if it's admissible, immediately it goes to the complainant and the complained about and the clerk. And then if it is admissible, which, there's obviously admissibility criteria, then it can go to, it can in between there before being admissible, before going to an investigation, there's a step that's a preliminary investigation, which incidentally.
Which your office initiates under your own authority.
Yes. Oh, yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. I mean, I would have a complete sort of power to drive the process in line with obviously fairness and justice.
Yes. Yeah.
But yeah, so I would decide those things. The preliminary investigation part, which is just before you might go to investigation, is to just clarify, is it admissible? What is going on here? If you're a bit lost at that stage for further detail. But, then it goes to investigation, and you can call witnesses under oath, you can compel documents, and then you write a report on with your recommendations, and that goes to the committee. The committee then consider the report and decide whether they agree with the recommendation or don't, and what the sanction is, and then that's all debated. But that's pretty much the process in a nutshell.
So your expectation is that the investigative process in respect of the ministerial code will operate in the same way, but discussions still to be completed on, as it were, to whom you as it were, report the outcome of your investigation and what the response to that would be.
Yes, I mean, perhaps those scholars know where that's going, but I've not been made aware of exactly that part of it yet. And again, I mean, I'm assuming it's going to be different, a little bit different than, because it's a different code. So I think it'll have to go to the executive afterwards, but that's my guess. I will probably be better briefed by Friday, but I know that we're still working things out too. So maybe, there's a bit of a time to do this. But there was just one thing, if you don't mind, that I would add, because I noticed I would meet with Catherine Stone and Caroline, and the last meeting we had, a number of meetings, we're very concerned, and I'm sure Douglas, I know we've shared some of these issues about sort of the bigger things that are happening that really the code should, I don't know how, but social media is a huge, huge issue. And I find that for the MLA, they are abused on social media quite often, and then they can make a mistake or whatever and do something that everybody wants to do. And there's very little movement, very little maneuverability because of, I think it's important, freedom of expression, extremely important. So I'm not arguing that, but I think any code that can reflect something or anything that would increase the trust people have, because what we find is that we are just telling people, it's not admissible because of freedom of expression. And it could be they could be very hurt by what's happened and all those things, but, that's the way it is. And so, I've kind of tried to get artistic about how I do that so that people don't feel that you're just dismissing their complaint, but even so, it seems, a big problem. It is a problem.
I think certainly our committee has recognised that in a number of areas, social media has created new problems and issues. And it's certainly something I know that has come up in the context of a review of local government standards that Jane Martin led, and which is awaiting government response on that, with the issue as to when are you speaking in your role as a private citizen, or when are you speaking as a public representative, and so on. Although it sounds as though, certainly in the Welsh system, that is less that rule does not apply quite as widely as specifically.
Yeah, thank you.
Could I perhaps add to that? There's a large number of my complaints are about activity on social media, and there was, prior to my appointment as acting commissioner, a body of opinion that wanted special rules about conduct on social media. I have very strongly opposed that, and so far have won the day, because what you say on social media can actually often be more hurtful than something said face to face. It's much wider circulation often. But I think the case law does provide a way through this. I mean, gratuitous personal insult is not acceptable, but politicians have a degree of enhanced protection about what they can reasonably say. So in the main, I haven't found that a major problem. But of course, the Welsh provision that it applies to members at all times in their private life makes my job rather easier than that.
I think that's completed the questions that we wanted to ask you, and we're extremely grateful for your time and to help us understand better how these issues are dealt with in Wales and in Northern Ireland. So thank you very much indeed.